Hi, it's me again, and the Odyssey continues. This chapter, we're going to talk about me being in a coma and intubated for 32 days and kind of what happened. And during my coma state, and they had to put me in a coma to try to slow everything down. And I guess that's pretty typical. But they would take me in and out of that comatose state to ensure that I had brain function. Because the loss of brain function is a very common occurrence for people who had been intubated. Along with lung failure, COVID is such a greedy virus. It basically, like cancer, goes from one organ to another organ to another organ to extremities to the brain, all over. It just spreads. So they wanted to make sure that that wasn't happening with me, so they put me onto this rotation where I was in a coma, then they would take me out. And about, I think probably a week into it, this is early in the COVID crisis, where there was no visitors, none, zero. So my wife, my biggest advocate, had to perpetually call in, and she got into a routine where it was a couple times a day, and she'd get to a certain nurse, a certain doctor, and get a status of where I was, and be announced to me, or I had no idea she was doing this, but she was updating Facebook on my status and what was going on. And I'm really grateful that she did that, because there were hundreds of people that I didn't even know that were keeping me in their prayers. And I think as we finish this chapter, you'll see where that really came into play. So, again, no protocols were set up on how to include loved ones that they couldn't be there in person. They didn't really have iPads and iPhones, and it was so new. But they asked if my wife was willing to do like a FaceTime with me, even though I was in that broken state. I said broken, just a comatose state. I guess that's one way of looking at it, a bit broken. And she said absolutely. And they said, well, I think he might respond well to that. So she started doing that. So at some point in time during the 32 days, I began to have a reoccurring dream. And it was almost like watching an episode of 24 with the dun-dun, with the, the dramatic noises and everything. And I need to describe it because it was so vivid that it had elements of actual reality. But because I was in that comatose state, I couldn't differentiate. All I knew is it was just, I was in this story, and it was real. And so the story begins as me being on a sales call, as I've been for the last 20 plus years, out of state, sitting in a waiting room and in a chair, and it was a remote spot. It was like, I think it might have been in Florida or Georgia, someplace in the south. But I remember having to drive there. It was a dirt road. It's kind of out of the way. And I was sitting in a waiting room. And while I was waiting, it's just like suddenly my arms, these straps came around both of my arms and my feet. And I couldn't move. And I was trying to pull up and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then someone came into the room and they took all of my possessions, my phone and my wallet, and at that point I figured, okay, these people are, I've been set up here. This is not right. Someone's trying to take advantage of me, and I'm not sure what's going on. Well, as the dream progressed, it became clear to me that the whole goal was to basically try to do identity theft on me. And they were trying to trick me into giving them information. And at one point in time, and actually this was ongoing, they kept trying to trick me by showing me my wife on the phone. And I was thinking, there's no way. That's not my wife. Or if it is my wife, they've lied to her to think that I'm okay, but I'm not. I'm a prisoner. And I couldn't communicate that. I couldn't communicate that because in this dream, it turned torturous very early on, where they put a mask on my face and they were limiting the amount of oxygen that I could have as they were trying to get information from me. It was like a form of torture. And throughout this entire ordeal, they were trying to collect data, and the amount of air I was getting was diminishing. And I got to the conclusion that they were just going to leave me there to die. And then because I could overhear people talking about, well, who's going to put them in the car, and where are we going to take them? Oh, we're going to dump them where we dumped the other ones. So this was not their first rodeo. This was some sort of a racket, and they were going to just dispose of me. And I'll tell you, I was angry. I was very angry. I was thinking to myself, what kind of person could torture somebody like this and then just leave them to die? And I was just thinking, well, if there was some way I could get access to the Wi-Fi network, and I started scheming and plotting and how I could get my revenge on these people. I was just angry. And this went on for days. And in between those days of me being angry and trying to figure out how to free myself from these restraints and trying to communicate with my wife that this wasn't real, that I was in trouble, I needed her help. If I could only get to her, she could understand that they were tricking me. It was just very, very intense. And I don't know at what point in time, but there was a transition in my thinking. And the transition came when I just said to myself, why are you harboring all this anger? Why are you trying to judge these people? Think about your Lord and Savior and what he said when he was on the cross. Forgive them, Father. They know not what they do. And, I thought to myself, well, God didn't come to the world to save those that are righteous. He came for the unrighteous. And it's wrong of me. And I started thinking about some different Bible scriptures and how inappropriate it was for me to be having those kind of thoughts. And I just asked God for forgiveness. I said, Lord, I don't want to harbor, as bad as it is, that's wrong, and I'm sorry, and forgive me. And I want to forgive these people, Lord. So I ask you to forgive them. They don't know what the ramifications are. And I don't know how much more I can take, Father. And if this is the end, I ask that you would accept me into your kingdom. And I remember after saying that, the environment, it just became like a warm feeling. There was somebody else in the room with me, and it just felt for the first time warm. Not like a white light or, one of those kind of sci-fi moments. It was just a comfort, which I had had in a while, because I was in that torturous state. And then the next thing I remember, I was awake. And I don't know how long the period of time was from me surrendering and me waking up. I just remember waking up and thanking God for that, for saving me and for taking me out of that state. And I remember the first coherent thought I had, and I couldn't speak because I had all of the tubes in me. And at that point, I had been extubated from the tube, but they had a tracheostomy on me, so I still had assisted breathing, so I couldn't speak. And the first thing I wrote down was, how long was I out? Because I had no conception of that. And they said 32 days, and I couldn't believe it. And so I spent another 2 weeks in the ICU, but the ICU isn't really designed to help people get off of the assisted breathing. That's not their goal, nor are they equipped to do that. So the, excuse me, I'm sorry. Oh man.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
This was the maybe the second time that I've gone through explaining what had happened to me, so sorry I became so emotional. It's, it's just hard to articulate what it meant. And it's in hindsight now that I know that statistically, anybody who survived after 2 weeks was fortunate. 3 weeks was remarkable. 4 weeks was almost a miracle. And I didn't realize how fortunate I was at the time, or what I believe, because I believe in the power of prayer. And the fact that there were hundreds of people supporting me in that fashion, I believe played a significant role in my recovery. And so, you can say it had to do with my physical acumen or my yogi spirit or whatever, but at the end of the day, there had been nobody who had survived 4 weeks, 4.5, or 32 days on a ventilator and come out of it. Nurses, I went about a month ago, I went back for a test, and the ICU nurses had requested that they wanted to see me. And I didn't remember them. I was obviously, I was in a coma. But when I got up there with my mask on and precautions, they were crying. I didn't understand. Why would they be crying? And they explained to me, you came in early on, and we had people that were a week on the vent, and some of them got better. But then the ones that didn't get better after 2 weeks, they started to die. And then they would come in again and go through the same cycle. And every time we'd go in, you would still be there. You were the only one that was still alive. They either died or they got better, but there was nobody that survived like you did. And by the way, Mr. Parker, you were pretty feisty. And I guess that's part of that dream where I was trying to free myself from the restraints, and they said that when they did the videos I would be shaking my head, and that was all tied into that drama, torturous dream that I had. But I guess to end this chapter, I feel fortunate because statistically I shouldn't be here, and I give the glory to God, and I thank all of you who were praying and thinking of me during that time. And we'll spend the next video on the me getting weaned off of the assisted breathing and the ups and downs with that experience. So that I might break that into a couple pieces, because that was about a month and a half of ups and downs. So thank you again for listening, and I hope that that this is inspirational for you guys, and to know that God does have a plan for all of us, and I think this is part of His plan for me, to share my experience with you. So I'll talk to you soon.